Hello, friends. Tonight, I want to tell you about a man they don't teach you the real story of. A man who helped light fuse of a revolution, and then almost like clockwork, was X'd out. His pamphlet sold hundreds of thousands of copies in a country that could barely even read. His words convinced ordinary farmers and blacksmiths that a king wasn't sacred, just simply a man in a goofy fancy hat. His face should be on the money. He should have a monument in every state capital. And I believe he should be on Mount Rushmore. Instead, when Thomas Paine died in 1809, only 6 people showed up to bury him. And 2 of them were black men who'd once been enslaved. People history barely bothered to name. It gets even weirder than that. Years later, his body was dug up in the middle of the night and smuggled onto a ship, hauled across the Atlantic Ocean, and then just apparently disappeared. No headstone, no grave, not a damn thing. So tonight, I'm asking the question nobody asks in school. Who benefits when a revolutionary gets erased? And was Paine simply too damn dangerous to be remembered? Here's what pulled me into Paine's story in the first place, and it's kind of the same thing that happened to me with Nietzsche. People that are considered polarizing in history, drawn to the ones who get celebrated for exactly one chapter of their life and then buried, sometimes literally for the rest of it. Paine wasn't a comfortable thinker, and comfortable thinkers don't get quietly dropped from the story. He didn't just criticize a king, he went after the entire architecture of the idea that one bloodline should own the fate of millions of strangers forever by accident of birth. He looked at hereditary monarchy, a system that had run the Western world for centuries, and basically said, that's bullshit. And everyone's just agreed not to say it out loud. Say that at the pub in 1770s London and see how fast people start avoiding you. He shows up in America in 1774 and he's broke. No one knows who the hell he is. No connections, no pedigree, which in hindsight be exactly why what happened next worked. In only 2 years, he writes Common Sense. And I want you to fit with how strange that title is. Not the rights of man, not some grand philosophical banner. Common sense. Like he's saying, this isn't radical. You've just been talked out of trusting your own instincts. At the start of 1776, most colonists still wanted to patch things up with Britain. Nobody was itching for a war with the most powerful empire on earth. And then this broke-ass immigrant with no formal education writes in plain, blunt language. No Latin, no legal jargon. Nothing an elite audience would gatekeep. And suddenly farmers and dock workers who'd never read a political tract in their life were quoting him. He argues that an island has no business ruling a continent. He argues monarchy is a corrupt racket dressed up as tradition. Hundreds of thousands of copies in a population of only a few million. Scale that to today, and you're talking about a single pamphlet reaching tens of millions of people and converting them practically overnight. That doesn't happen by accident. It's the moment fuse gets lit, and it was Paine that lit it. Here's where it gets interesting. Most revolutionaries, once the revolution works, get quiet. They take the W, they take the title, and they settle into respectability. Paine didn't know how to do that. Or maybe he refused to. He goes to France. He backs the French Revolution. He writes the rights of man, going even harder after monarchy than before. And then he writes the Age of Reason. This is the one that really cost him. Tearing into organized religion itself, arguing reason should outrank even scripture. And just like that, the same country that once passed his words hand to hand like scripture of its own turned on him completely. In a deeply religious young nation, that book didn't just lose him fans. It gave the powerful people he'd embarrassed for years a clean, respectable excuse to now disown him. Suddenly, he wasn't a patriot who went too far. He was branded an atheist, a troublemaker. Someone decent people didn't mention in polite company. Isn't that convenient? And this is the part of the story that, if I'm being honest, kind of pisses me off. Paine's relationship with the men who would later be called the Founding Fathers. George Washington owes Paine more than most textbooks will admit. During the darkest stretch of the Revolutionary War, it's Paine's words. These are the times that try men's souls, that get read aloud to freezing, starving troops, keep them from deserting. Paine's pen arguably kept the army together. Later, Paine's rotting in a French prison during the Reign of Terror. And by his account, Washington does essentially nothing. Silence, while Paine sits waiting for the guillotine. And Paine never forgave him for it, publicly accusing him of abandoning an old ally the second it became inconvenient to remember him. And Jefferson? Jefferson's the quiet one. Privately, he admires Paine, stays in touch with him, clearly respects his mind. Publicly, barely a word in his defense, and I think that silence tells you everything. Jefferson understood very well how radioactive Paine had become, and defending him openly was a political quote unquote liability. So Paine becomes this kind of strange figure, becomes the revolutionary, powerful men would praise in a private letter and then pretend not to know him in public. Here's my theory for what it's worth. Paine wasn't rejected despite being right. He was rejected because he was right too early, too plainly. For the people who benefited from things simply staying vague. He believed government legitimacy comes from the people, full stop. No damn bloodlines or divine right. He believed ordinary people with no titles and no fortune were fully capable of governing themselves. Some of his later writings on social welfare and economic support for the poor sound like they could have been written in the last 50 years, not in the 1790s. Took institutions everyone else treated as sacred, throne, the church, inherited wealth, and just simply applied logic to them, out loud, in print. It's not a safe thing to do in any century. History loves a dead radical, but a living one who won't stop talking? Hell no, we cannot have that. And then the ending, and that part still bothers me a bit, a wee bit, a titch, if you will. 1809 New York. Thomas Paine dies poor, isolated, mostly shunned by the country he helped build. 6 people at the funeral. His work had been seen and heard by millions at this point, and yet only 6 people at his funeral. 6. The man who helped talk an entire continent into independence gets a smaller send-off than most of us will get from our own extended family. And it doesn't end there. About a decade later, an English admirer named William Cobbett, convinced Paine deserved a proper monument back in England, digs up his bones and ships them across the Atlantic. A memorial Cobbett promised, never built. Cobbett dies, and somewhere in that mess, Paine's remains just simply vanish from the historical record. To this day, nobody can tell you with certainty where Thomas Paine's bones actually are. Think about that. We know where kings are buried. We know where his contemporaries are buried, marked, visited, mourned for centuries. But the man who told an entire generation that kings were not sacred doesn't even have a grave you can stand in front of. You can make that what you will. Maybe that's the fitting end for a man like Paine. He belonged nowhere by design. He was considered too radical for England, too radical for America, and eventually even too radical for the revolutionaries who owed him their movement. not here to tell you Paine was right about everything. He wasn't. But I keep coming back to this question. What does it cost to say the true thing before the world is ready to hear it? He was useful right up until he was inconvenient. And the moment he became inconvenient, door closed fast. So here's what I want you sitting with tonight. The lights are off. How many voices like this? Ones who saw it clearly and early and said so, quietly erased instead of remembered. And who decided that was the story we'd tell? This has been After Dark Radio with Weezy. Stay curious. Never stop questioning the stories you were handed.